Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of how we live together. Should the law actually enforce what we think is morally right? We're diving into the epic and, let's be honest, often explosive clash between what's illegal and what's simply immoral.
All right, let's kick things off with a little thought experiment. I think we can all agree that lying is immoral, right? But, should you be thrown in jail for telling a little white lie about your friend's new haircut? No way, right? And right there, in that simple example, we see this huge gap between what feels wrong and what should actually be a crime.
Okay, so let's take it a step further. What about something like adultery, which many people find deeply, deeply immoral? Or what about something even more private, like getting drunk in the comfort of your own home? For the most part, the law in many places just stays out of it.
And this is what brings us to the very core of what we're talking about today. This isn't just some philosophical puzzle for a late-night debate. It is a fundamental, real-world question that our legal systems, our judges, and all of us as a society have been wrestling with for centuries. Where do you draw that line?
So to really get into this debate, you got to understand the basic tools we're working with. Think of it this way. Law has teeth. It's coercive. It's enforced by an external power, the state, the police, the courts. Morality, on the other hand, is persuasive. It's enforced by something inside you, your conscience, that feeling of guilt, or maybe just pressure from your friends and family. They're two totally different animals.
So, you might be wondering, where did this modern debate really catch fire? Well, it absolutely exploded into the public eye back in 1957 in Great Britain, all because of a government report that became famous. Or maybe infamous, depending on who you ask. It was called the Wolfenden Report.
So, the committee behind this thing, they laid out what was, for the time, a super radical vision. They basically said, look, the criminal law's job isn't to be the nation's moral police. Its job is to protect people, especially the vulnerable, and to keep the peace. And because of that, they came to a bombshell conclusion. What consenting adults do in private, and they were specifically talking about homosexual acts, is simply not the law's business.
And that quote right there, it just perfectly sums up their whole argument. This one sentence lit the fuse for a massive intellectual and cultural war. The very idea that there could be a whole zone of sin that was completely separate from the zone of crime, well, that was revolutionary, and it sparked a furious backlash.
So who was on the other side of this fight? Well, leading the charge against the report was one of the most powerful legal figures of the day, a judge named Lord Devlin. And for him, the Wolfenden Report wasn't just wrong, it was downright dangerous.
Devlin's argument? It was incredibly powerful and really pretty simple. He said that a shared, common morality is like the invisible glue that holds a society together. And if you start letting people chip away at that glue, even behind closed doors, the whole building could just collapse. For him, a private sin wasn't just a personal failing. It was a threat to national security, just like treason.
Okay, but wait. How do you even figure out what this shared morality is? Whose morality are we talking about? Devlin said you don't take a poll. Instead, you look to a classic idea in law, the reasonable man. Just picture an ordinary person, the man in the jury box or someone riding the bus. What would that person find so disgusting, so intolerable, that it just can't be allowed? For Devlin, that was the standard the law had to protect.
And what's so cool about this idea is how it's not just a British thing. It travels. A Nigerian justice, Kayode Eso, took the same concept and adapted it for his country. He wasn't talking about a man on a London bus, but maybe a housewife shopping in a Lagos market. The context changes, but the core principle is the same. Morality comes from the common person.
But Lord Devlin's view was about to get a serious challenge. In the other corner of this intellectual boxing match, you had the hugely influential legal philosopher H.L.A. Hart, and he was fighting for a totally different vision, a vision all about individual liberty.
Now, Hart wasn't just pulling this idea out of thin air. He was building on the work of the legendary 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill. And this quote, this is the heart of it all. It's called the harm principle, and it's simple. The government has absolutely no business telling you what to do, even if you're making bad choices, unless your choices are directly hurting someone else.
So Hart looked at Devlin's reasonable man idea and saw a huge danger. He warned it could lead to something he called moral populism. That's the idea that just because most people think something is immoral, they get to make it illegal for everybody. Hart basically said, hold on, that's not what democracy is. For him, real democracy protects minorities from the whims of the majority, not the other way around.
So let's just pause and sum this up, because what we have here are two totally different blueprints for what the law is even for. On one side, Devlin says the law must act as a moral guardian to stop society from crumbling. But on the other side, Hart says, no, the law's only job is to protect liberty and prevent harm, because the real danger is the tyranny of the majority.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just some dusty debate happening in university libraries. Nope. Just a few years later, a real-life court case dropped that put all these theories to the ultimate test. It all revolved around this guy, Frederick Shaw. And he'd published this little booklet called The Ladies' Directory. And it was, well, exactly what it sounds like. A guide to London's prostitutes, complete with their pictures, their phone numbers, and even a list of the services they offered.
So Shaw gets hit with 3 charges. Now, the first 2, pretty standard stuff for the time. But it was that third one that made everyone's heads turn. Conspiracy to corrupt public morals. This was a super old, almost forgotten charge that prosecutors basically pulled out of a dusty old law book just for this case.
And when the court made its decision, wow, they went all in, siding completely with Lord Devlin. The head judge, Lord Simmons, declared that the court was the Custos Morum, that's Latin for a guardian of public morals. He basically said the court had the power to step in and punish any new type of wickedness it saw. It was a massive, real-world win for Lord Devlin's philosophy.
Okay, so you might be listening to this and thinking, all right, interesting story from the 60s, but what does it have to do with me? Well, everything. Because this exact same fight, Devlin's moralism versus Hart's liberty, is still raging today in some of our most intense public debates.
I mean, just think about some of the biggest, most emotional debates we have today. Same-sex marriage, euthanasia, abortion laws, even what's okay to say online. In every single one, you can hear the echoes of this debate. One side argues we need laws to protect a shared moral code for the good of society. The other side argues for individual freedom, the right to choose, as long as you're not hurting anyone. It's Devlin versus Hart, playing out right now.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough final question. As our society's values keep shifting and evolving, what should the law's job be? Should it just follow along with public opinion? Should it try to lead us into the future? Or should its job be to stand firm and protect the traditions of the past? This debate is far from over, and how we answer that question, well, that's what will shape the world we all live in.